Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So this morning we'll be doing another sutta study session. So this morning we have a discourse from the Anguttara Nikaya. So this is, let me see here, what sutta are we looking at today? Anguttara Nikaya 3.40. Let me just pull this up on my screen. This is called the Adhipateyya Sutta. So Adipataya means the overlord or the authority. So this is a discourse where the Buddha speaks about three kinds of concepts of authority or dominance, which one might use in order to motivate oneself to practice well. So as usual, I'll go through the sutta and give some explanation, and then at the end I'll take any questions that you might have. So we can start by paying homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So again, this is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 3, sutta number 40, and it's called Adhipateyya Sutta. So the discourse on the overlord, or the dominance, the authority. And the sutta begins, Tinimani bhikkhave adipateyani. So there's these three kinds of adipateyya. So adipateyya comes from the word adipati. So adipati is the overlord, the one who is in control of things. And he says, Katamani tini, what three? Atta dipateyang, loka dipateyang, dhamma dipateyang. So there's having one's atta, oneself, as the authority, or one's motivation, one's inspiration. Loka dipateyang means having the world as one's authority, motivation. And the third one is Dhamma Adipataya, so having the Dhamma itself as one's authority. So here the Buddha then defines each of these three terms and explains what he means by them. So the first one he says, Katamancha bhikkhave atta adipataya. So what is self-authority or self-motivation? He says, Ida bhikkhave bhikkhu aranyagatova rukamulagatova sunyagaragatova iti parisanchikati. So he says here a monk who has gone to the wilderness or to the base of a tree or to an empty dwelling, which in the suttas normally the Buddha uses this when he's talking about meditation practice. So when someone is going to do meditation practice, then they'll go to the wilderness or to the base of a tree or to an empty building in order to do their meditation. And they reflect in this way. Nako panahang chivra hetu agarasma anagaryang pabachito. One reflects, I have not gone forth from the household life into homelessness for the sake of robes. So why do we become monastics? So to go forth from the household life into homelessness means to become a monastic, to become a Buddhist monk. So why do we do this? Do we do this so we can get robes? Is that the purpose? Of course not. That's just a side effect. So this, the Buddha here is recommending that a monk reflect in this way, like, oh, I didn't become a monk just for the robes. And it continues, na pindapata hetu. And I didn't do it for the alms food. Na senasana hetu. So senasana means a place for lying down and sitting sitting. So a place where you sit and where you lie down is your dwelling place. So we also did not become monastics just to have somewhere to live. And then the fourth one, na iti bhava bhava hetu. And this is interesting because if you're used to the four requisites, you'd expect that the fourth item on this list would be the medicines, medical supplies. But instead it's iti bhava bhava. So the word iti means thus, or in this way, or a certain kind of. Bhava means a state of existence, or becoming, or being. And abhava means non-being, non-becoming. So iti bhava bhava means wanting to be or not be something in particular. So in other words, it's wanting to have a particular status or a particular state of existence. So this also is interesting because it's pointing to the fact that we become monastics not necessarily because we want to be monks necessarily, but because being a monk is a support towards attaining the final goal of our spiritual practice. And we definitely don't become monks in order to become bishops or archbishops or chowkuns or any of these other goofy things that people made up hundreds of years after the Buddha. So we're not trying to become anything. We're not trying to become a great teacher. We're not trying to become a great scholar. We're not trying to become anything in particular. We're just trying to attain awakening. That's all. And that's the next reflection here that the Buddha is encouraging a monk to make when they're doing their meditation practice. The next reflection, he says, is to think, Apicha komhi otinno jatiya jarayamarnena sokehi paridevehi dukehi dominasehi upayasehi dukotinno dukupareto. So he says, instead one should think, I am overwhelmed by birth, decay, death, sorrow, anguish, pain, depression, and despair. I'm overwhelmed by dukkha. I'm engulfed by dukkha. And apeva name masakevalasa dukkha kandasa antikiriya panyaye tati. This means so, and perhaps there's a way to discover a complete end to all of this dukkha. Maybe there's a way to put an end to all of this suffering. So this is the motivation for entering monastic life. It's recognizing our dukkha and wishing to become free of dukkha. It's actually interesting. One of the most common questions that we get as Buddhist monks is, why did you become a monk? And actually, I've heard this question asked to countless different monks over the years, and almost invariably the answer is some variation on what the Buddha says right here, because we recognize that we're overwhelmed by dukkha, we're engulfed in dukkha, and we want to find a way out of dukkha. So it's a very simple answer, but it's a very powerful motivation for practice. And it carries on, the reflection the Buddha encourages. Then it says, Ahancheva ko panaya desike kame ohaya agarasmana garyang pabachito ta desike va kame parye seyang tatova papitatare nametang patirupangti. So he says, if I were to leave behind this monastic life for the sake of the kind of sensuality which I renounced in order to become a monk in the first place. So the grammar of this sentence is a little bit complicated, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But basically it's reflecting. It's like I left behind a lot of opportunity for sensual pleasure in order to become a monk. So if I then leave behind the monk life just to go back to that same kind of pleasure, well, that wouldn't really be appropriate. That wouldn't really make any sense. And so then it continues. He says, so iti patisanchekati. So he reflects. Aradang ko paname viryang vivisati asalinang, which means I will have unrelenting energy. So I will arouse unrelenting energy. Upatita sati asammutta. I will establish mindfulness, which is not muddled. Mindfulness which is completely clear and bright and sharp. Pasaddo kayo asaraddo. My body will be tranquil, not agitated. Samahitang chittang ekaganti. So my mind will be concentrated, unified. So samahitang means is the one form of the word samadhi. So the mind will be in samadhi, it will be unified and stable. And the Buddha says, and so this is the end of the reflection for the first one, atta adipataya. And the Buddha says, so attanang yeva adipatang karitva, akusalang pachahati kusalang bhaveti, savajang pachahati anavajang bhaveti, suddhang attanang pariharati. So attanang yeva adipatang karitva. This means one has set up oneself as one's authority, as one's overlord, as one's motivation. Again, this word adipati, which means the overlord, the one which spurs one to act in a particular way. And so establishing this is as one's motivation, then one abandons the unwholesome, akusalang pachahati. One cultivates wholesomeness, kusalang bhaveti. One abandons what's blameworthy, savajang pachahati. One cultivates what's blameless, anavajang bhaveti. And one maintains one's own purity, suddhang attanang pariharati. So the motivation here is one reflects, like, why did I become a monk in the first place? Did I do it for the robes, the food, the dwelling places, or to get some fancy title or some fancy role? Is that why I did this? No, it wasn't the purpose. So it's reflecting back to our original motivation. Why did we embark upon the spiritual quest in the first place? So by reminding ourselves of our original motivation, then that can help to reestablish our enthusiasm for the practice. Because it's actually quite normal that over the course of one's practice, I mean, Buddhist practice takes a very, very long time. Many years, many decades, many lifetimes. It can take a really long time. So it's normal that our enthusiasm will wax and wane. Our enthusiasm will go up and down. And sometimes you get to a point where you're just like, so much dukkha doing all this Buddhist practice stuff. Maybe I'll just drop it and go live an easy life. So then the Buddha is saying here, like, well, to reflect. It's like, well, why did I become a monk in the first place? Why am I doing all this Buddhist practice in the first place? It's because I already saw how much dukkha there is in living an ordinary life. So it wouldn't make any sense for me to go back to that. Instead, I should really commit myself to trying to reach the complete end of suffering. I should really try to commit myself to attaining complete awakening. So the Buddha says, "Erang vuchati bhikkhave atta adipateyang." So this is having oneself as one's overlord, one's motivation, one's authority. And next he says, "Katamancha bhikkhave loka adipateyang." So what is having the world as one's adipati? And he says, "Ida bhikkhave bhikkhu aranyagatova rukamulagatova sanyagara iti patisanchekati." So again, one goes to a place to meditate and reflects in this way. And it begins the same. So I didn't become a monk for the sake of robes, food, dwelling, to become anything in particular, but rather because I was overwhelmed by dukkha and I wanted to find an escape from dukkha. So it starts off the same, but then it goes a bit differently. Next it says, "Ahancheva kopana evang pabajito samano." So when I have become a renunciant in this way, so when I've become a monk for these reasons, kama vitakang va vitakeyang, vyapara vitakang va vitakeyang, vihingsa vitakang va vitakeyang. So he's saying, if I were to think sensual thoughts, aversive thoughts, or cruel thoughts, mahako panayang loka sannivaso. He says, then I would be living the same way as most people. It's just like living in the world. So it's like I've left behind the ordinary lay life in order to devote myself to spiritual practice. But if I'm just sitting here thinking a bunch of layperson thoughts, then what's the difference really? If I'm sitting here thinking about sensuality and I'm sitting here thinking about what I hate and all this, it's like, well, that's just what lay people do. That's what ordinary people who aren't spiritually advanced. That's what they do with their lives. So why would I be doing the same thing? And then he carries on with this reflection. He says, Mahantas minko panaloka sannivaso santi samana brahmana idimanto dibachakuka parachita vidino. He says, and in this vast world, there are contemplatives and priests. So samana brahmana means spiritual practitioners, contemplatives and religious practitioners of various sorts. So there are contemplatives and priests, religious practitioners who have psychic powers. Iddimanto, they have psychic powers. Devachakuka, they have divine vision, so superhuman vision, spiritual sight. Parachita viduno means they can know the minds of other people. In other words, they're able to read minds. So you reflect, oh, I'm having these disgusting, unwholesome thoughts. And in this vast world, there are many spiritual practitioners who can read other people's minds. And carries on, te duratopi pasanti, asanapi nadisanti, chetasapi chitang pajananti. So it says they can see, even from far away, they can see and know the minds of others. And one continues with the reflection, tepi mung evang janeyang, so they might know me in this way. Pasatabo emang kula putong sada agarasma anagaring pabajito samano. So they might see his mind and think, look, this person has gone from the household life into monastic life out of faith. But vokinova harati papake akusahi damehi. But they live all mixed up with a lot of harmful, unwholesome mind states. And the reflection continues. Devatapiko santi idimantinio dibachakuka parachitividunio. So also there are devas, there are angels, there are spirits who similarly they have the power to read other people's minds. And it gives the same reflection. They also might read my mind and see that I'm mixed up in all these unwholesome states of mind, that I'm engaging in all these unwholesome mental activities. And so then based upon this, they come to the same conclusion. So itipati sanchikati, so again, they reflect. I will arouse unrelenting energy. I will establish unblurred mindfulness. My body will be tranquil, not agitated, and my mind will be concentrated and unified. And the Buddha says, so lokang yeva adipatang karitva, so having established the world as one's authority, as one's overlord, as one's motivation. Then one abandons the unwholesome, cultivates the wholesome, abandons the blameworthy, cultivates the blameless, and maintains one's purity. So this is what it means to have the world as one's adipatya, as one's authority or one's motivation. So this one, it actually has three parts here. So the first one is recognizing that when one is immersed in unwholesome thoughts, so thoughts of sensuality, thoughts of aversion, thoughts of cruelty, then one is just acting like most of the world. So kind of defeats the purpose. Like, why are we monks if we're not actually acting like monks? Why are we monks if we're not thinking like monks? What's the point of this life if we're just going to be like lay people? And then also reflecting. And there are advanced spiritual practitioners who can read my mind. And what would they think? if they could see what was going on in my mind. So there's a few examples in the suttas of monks who are not doing terribly well in their meditation practice, and then another monk reads their mind and comes to scold them, or to offer them some teachings to help them along the path. And also there's more contemporary examples of this as well. One of the more well-known is from the biography of Ajahn Mun. So at one point, Ajahn Mun was in a monastery, and there was another monk there. And Ajahn Mun decided to go and check out how that monk's meditation was doing. So Ajahn Mun read the mind of the other monk, and he saw that the monk was actually just sitting there thinking a bunch of sensual thoughts instead of meditating. So Ajahn Mun went up and criticized the monk, like, "What are you doing? Why are you wasting your time with all these useless thoughts?" And the monk freaked out and ran away and disrobed. So that's an example of it going not so well. So Ajahn Mun then based upon that incident, he then resolved that in the future he would be more discreet about how he used that particular ability. And similarly, I remember years ago asking my preceptor Ajahn Pasano about monks who can read others' minds. And he said, yeah, there are many, many monks who can read other people's minds, but mostly they don't, because they don't want to look at all that disgusting stuff. So his point was like, yeah, there are a lot of monks who can read minds, but for the most part, you don't really need to worry about it. They're not interested in your mind. It's kind of like looking inside a compost bin or looking inside a sewer. They're not really interested in having a look in there. But this reflection that if a spiritually advanced monk, if they did look in my mind, what would they see? Would they see a bright, wholesome, joyful place of spiritual practice? Or would they see a bunch of sensual thoughts, aversive thoughts, greedy thoughts, cruel thoughts? What would they see if they looked in my mind? Would they be happy with what they saw, or would they be disappointed? And for devas coming and spying on people's minds, there's, again, many suttas along these lines where devas come and look at the mind of a monk and again see that the monk is goofing off or not doing very well. And then the deva comes and offers advice or words of encouragement or support to try to get that monk to start practicing correctly again. So this is another way to motivate yourself in your practice, is to think, if deva or advanced monk were to read my mind, would they be happy with what they see? So this can also help to motivate you. Then the third one, so it says, Katamancha bhikkhave Dhamma Adipateyya. So it says, and monks, what does it mean to have the Dhamma as your authority, as your motivation? And so it starts off the same. So one goes to a place to meditate and reflects that one didn't become a monk just for the sake of robes and food and dwelling places and states of being. But rather it's because one was overwhelmed with dukkha and wanted to find an escape from dukkha. But then the specific content for this one, it says, one reflects, Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo. So this Dhamma has been well explained by the Buddha. It's sanditiko. Sanditiko means it's immediately visible. You can see the truth of it right here and right now. It's akaliko. This means it's timeless. It's not affected by time. It's not limited by time. It's always relevant. Past, present, and future. It's always relevant. It's always the same. It's ehipasiko. Ehipasiko literally means come and look. So ehipasiko means that it's something that you can see for yourself. It's visible. It's something which you don't need to rely upon blind faith. You can actually see it for yourself. Opanayiko. This means that it leads one onwards. It brings one closer to the truth. So upanayiko, by the way, it comes from the prefix upa, which means close or near, and naya, which means to lead someone or guide someone. So upanayiko, it literally means it's bringing you closer. So brings you closer to the truth, brings you closer to awakening. Pachatang veditabo vinyuhi. So it's something which can be personally experienced by wise people. So here the reflection is, it's like, I have access to the Dhamma, and it's great. It's really well explained. It's something which is immediately apparent. It's something which I can know for myself. What a wonderful thing to have access to this delightful Dhamma, this incomparable Dhamma. And it continues, Santi ko paname sa brahmachari janang pasang viharanti. And it continues, it says, and there are other people in this spiritual life, so other Buddhist monks, who know and see. So this means people who have attained some stage of awakening. So knowing and seeing the Dhamma means that it's not just a belief or an idea for them, but it's something which they actually directly experience and understand. And it continues, Ahancheva kopana evang svakate dhammavinaya pabajito samano. So if I, having become a monastic in this well-explained Dhamma Vinaya, so this well-explained system of teachings and trainings, Viharayang pamato, if I were to live negligently, nametang asa patirupang, that would not be proper. So it's just the reflection. It's like, oh, I have access to this amazing Dhamma. It's such a rare and special and wonderful thing. And there are people who practice this Dhamma and attain stages of awakening. So having become a monk in this delightful system of teachings and trainings, I shouldn't be wasting time. That would really not be proper. I shouldn't be negligent. I should really make an effort here. And so then with that as one's motivation, it says, as before, one arouses unrelenting energy, clear mindfulness, a tranquil body, and a concentrated mind. And so this means to take the Dhamma as one's authority, as one's motivation. So these are the three kinds of motivation. So again, the first one is reflecting on oneself, in particular, reflecting upon the crude sensuality that one has left behind in order to become a monk, and how pointless it would be to go back to that. The second one is reflecting on the fact that there are others in the world who can read your mind. And if they were to read your mind, what would they think? Would they be impressed, or would they be disgusted? Would they be disappointed? And the third one is reflecting upon the purity of the Dhamma itself, and what a rare and wonderful opportunity it is to have access to the Dhamma and to be able to practice the Dhamma. So having access to this, why would we waste our time? Why would we neglect the Dhamma in order to disperse our time on unimportant things? Then the sutta ends with a few verses, so short poetry, which is quite common in the Anguttara Nikaya. So it starts off, Nati loke raho nama papakam mang pakubato. So it says, there is no secrecy in the world for one who does evil deeds. This actually is good to remember, because often we have this thought of like, well, if nobody sees me do it, then I can get away with it. But actually the Buddha says there's no privacy in this world. You can never escape. If nothing else, you at least know what you've done. If not telepaths or devas that are watching, but at least one person knows what you've done. And you can't escape your own karma. If you create karma, then you'll get the result. So atta te purisa janati. So people know themselves. Sachang va yadi vamusa. They know themselves what is true and what is false. So here the Buddha is actually pointing to the innate ability that we have in order to know right from wrong. He says, Kalyanang vatabo sakhi attanang atimanyasi. Yosantang atinipapang attanang pariguhasi. So having seen what's wholesome, having known what's wholesome, one who one would look down on oneself, knowing one's own evil deeds that one tries to conceal. So this here, the Buddha is also pointing to the fact that when we do behave in unwholesome ways, we ourselves know what we've done. We ourselves know that we're not making the best use of our time. So that tends to generate the certain negativity towards oneself, even if others don't know. But he continues. He says, "Pasanti deva cha tathagata cha lokasming balang visamang charantang." And he says, and devas and tathagatas, they see the fools in the world who behave inappropriately. So again, not only did we ourselves know what we're doing, but also the angels, the spirits, and advanced practitioners, they also know what we're doing with our time. So he says, Tasma hi atta Adipateyya kocha loka dipo cha nipako cha jayi. So he says, so then establishing oneself as one's motivation, as well as the world as one's motivation, one should diligently practice meditation. Dhamma dipo cha anudhammachari nahi yati sacha parakamo muni. So here it's saying a wise person with the Dhamma as their authority should practice in accordance with the Dhamma. They should not abandon the effort to attain the truth. And pasaiha marang abibuya antikang yocha pusi jati kayang padanava. So here one who is diligent and resolute can overcome Mara, can put an end to Mara's power over them, and can reach the ending of birth. They can reach that which is never born and never dies. So one can touch Nibbana, can arrive at the absolute. And it continues, so tadaso loka vidusamedo sabbesu dhammesu atamayo muni. And it says, such a wise person who knows the world, such a wise person has atamaya, means like non-identification with all phenomena. So in other words, such a person has completely discarded all self-identity. So that's the end of this discourse. A lovely sutta, which I reflect on from time to time as a motivation to use one's time wisely and to make the most of this opportunity to practice Dhamma. So we can respect the suttas with 3 sadhus, and then I'll take any questions you might have. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, and hello to all the people joining in. So hello to Jayanta, Vivian, Geeta, Rick, John, Yankee, Melissa, Sud, Shriti, Kumu, SB, Elaine, Marielle, Ashok, Taiwan, Dolly, Ujatila, Juliana, Ja, Krishna, Akshata, Putrika, Jay, Jevli, Ranga, and Victoria. Wow, lots of people checking in. Good to see all of you. And I see a couple of questions. So Sud asks, Dear Bhante, is it just a natural result of intense practice, like a side effect, that some people develop these powers? It almost seems like every time the Buddha mentions these, he is so unimpressed. I assume here you're talking about psychic powers. And in the sutta, the one that's mentioned is telepathy. So in particular, reading the minds of other people. It's not necessarily a natural result of intense practice in that not everybody develops these powers. One of the more well-known examples of this is there's a sutta with Sariputta and Moggallana. And Sariputta was known for his incredible wisdom, his analytical explanations of Dhamma. But it was also known that he had no psychic powers at all. He had no supernormal powers at all. Whereas Moggallana, on the other hand, had full mastery of supernormal abilities. So it's not a natural result of practice, but it does happen in some people based upon their past development of mind. Some people have innate inclination towards cultivating paranormal abilities. And so then as they practice Buddhism, then that naturally comes to the surface and those abilities manifest. So that's the product of past karma. And some people do deliberately try to cultivate mind powers, which you can do, though it's not really the most productive use of your time. Usually it's better just to try to attain awakening. But there are ways to directly develop these powers if someone wants to. But it's not really encouraged because, again, it's not necessary for awakening. It's more like a side effect. And yeah, the Buddha, when he talks about it, he never talks about it with any particular praise. And that's because these powers of mind are things that can be developed even by people who are not on the path of awakening. So one can develop incredible psychic powers, but not actually develop any wisdom, not actually develop even the path to stream entry. One example of this is Devadatta. So Devadatta had developed various psychic powers, but then when he started doing extremely unwholesome acts, then he lost his abilities. He started dropping away. So even that was only a temporary attainment. And there's another question, also from Sud. It says, it seems there is so much emphasis on being a monk. Did the Buddha mention meditations or practices that are catered towards lay people for them to progress while remaining in lay life? The main emphasis the Buddha made for lay people is practicing morality and generosity. These are the primary things to cultivate as a lay person. Otherwise, I mean, realistically, if you want to practice most of the advice that the Buddha gives is perfectly relevant for lay people as well. So most of the meditation practices he describes are not specific to monks. They can be done by anybody. These ones in particular, so again, there is some things in there which are reflecting upon being a monk, but you can still reflect. Even as a layperson, if you're sitting there supposedly meditating, but actually you're just rolling around in unwholesome thoughts, then you can still apply these reflections of like, well, wait a minute, what am I doing? What would advanced monks think if they read my mind right now? Probably wouldn't be too impressed. What would the devas think if they saw my mind right now? Yeah, they wouldn't be impressed. Again, it's like, wait a minute, I have access to this great Dhamma. Why am I polluting my mind instead of purifying it? So you can still apply these reflections. You just might need to modify them a little bit in your own mind. So I mean, generally speaking, the teachings the Buddha gives are applicable also to dedicated lay practitioners, but you might need to modify things a little bit. When, like in this case, in the sutta, it's very clearly aimed at monks. But if you just modify it a little bit, you can get something which is still quite useful and relevant to a dedicated lay practitioner. And Rick says, what is the skillful balance of being guided and motivated by personal suffering, direct experience, teachers, and the Dhamma? First off, I just have to say, I'm always a bit puzzled whenever people say the word balance. I never really understand what they mean by this word. Because to me, Buddhism is actually not about balance. Buddhism is about extremism, in that we are extremely motivated to breaking completely free of the cycle of samsara. That's not balance. That's actually pretty far out. So I'm actually not entirely convinced that balance has anything to do with Buddhism. Anyway, so what is skillful? What is a skillful way of being guided and motivated by personal suffering, direct experience, teachers, and the Dhamma? Look at the results of what you're doing. This is always your basic guide for any practice. What effect is it having on you? Is it leading towards greater tranquility, greater wisdom? Is it leaning towards stronger compassion? Is it leaning towards deeper serenity? Is it leading to an increase in wholesome traits and a diminishing in unwholesome traits? This is your basic guideline. So if you're doing something and it's increasing your unwholesome traits, then it's time to change things up or to reevaluate your approach. To consider that maybe there's a different way of doing things that would be better. So you always go by the effects it's having. That's how you know. And that's the last question from online. Any questions from the monastery residents? No? Okay, well, if there's nothing else, that might be it for this morning. So we can go ahead and end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.